Now we're super excited to present our next speaker who will be giving the opening keynote. I would want to welcome Sanjay Jain. Sanjay, if I read out all his credentials and accomplishments, I'll probably take his whole time myself. So he's very modestly asked me to only specify a couple of highlights. So Sanjay is a partner at Bharat Innovation Fund, which basically invests in startups, which focuses on intellectual property. Among his other accomplishments, he's also been deeply involved with iSpirit, which I'm sure is a familiar name with all of you, who have played such an important role in making the India stack such a transformative kind of process for our country. He's also the chair of the technology committee at MOSIP, which is the modular open source identity platform entity that drives a lot of foundational work on digital ID for the government. And I really can go on, but I think you'll probably want to hear Sanjay more than me. So with that, I introduce Sanjay. Yeah.
Thanks for that. So when I was coming here, I was asked to sort of put together some opening remarks, and I thought I'll use some notes. But broadly, I think a lot of the work that I have done in this space over the last few years, since the work was done, after that, we've been thinking about it, and the concept of digital public goods and digital public infrastructure has sort of emerged, I think, over the last 2 years. And I thought, let me spend a little bit of time on that and then come to the work that we have done in India and, reflect on what that means and then what we're doing now. So digital public goods is a term which shot into limelight a couple of years ago through the UN Secretary General's report, and that then led to the creation of the Digital Public Goods Alliance. And what a digital public good actually derives from the original sense of public good, which is something which is non-rivalrous and non-excludable, which means it's like the air around us. My using the air doesn't affect your usage, and on the other hand, I can't stop you from using it, and so on. But if you take this and translate this to the digital sphere, what that typically ends up meaning is software systems which exhibit similar capabilities, where they are designed in a way that everybody can use them without impacting each other, and so on. But then the DPGA came out with a more specific framework to talk about what is a digital public good, and they set up a registry that allows them to use this framework to define that and make a list of DPGs out there. So they specifically look at open source, because that's one of the things that makes sure that you don't prevent other people from not using it, and so on. So open source, open data, open content, open AI models, all of these start to form what could be a digital public good. And the other interesting one that came up is a digital public infrastructure, which again derives from the public goods concept, but is typically implemented as infrastructure. So if you think of payment in India, that's an infrastructure on which you can have multiple goods being delivered, and so on. And but when you look at an infrastructure, the infrastructure itself may not be based on open source. So which is why they sort of said, okay, the infrastructure itself has different characteristics than the underlying software. And as a result of which, you could create digital public infrastructure without using open source. And again, there's no registry of this so far, but it's broadly been accepted that ID systems and payments are two key elements that form there. So now, coming back to the work that we have done in India on these fronts, we sort of did that work when these definitions were not there, and in fact, some of these definitions came about from the success of the work that was done in India, and people thinking about what's happening and why it's happening, and so on. And so, if we take a look at the various systems in the India stack, I've had a role in many of them, at least in the early days. So Aadhaar is sort of set up as a centralized entity that issues identity. But it provides for API access for authentication for external parties, including the government, banking, and telecom, and so on. And so it is basically then makes sure that as a resident of India, I have an ID, which I can then use in all of these use cases. And that then sort of starts to become more like a digital public infrastructure, which then can be used by everyone. It provides benefits. My usage doesn't stop other people from using it, and so on. The second system that we built, or which has got large-scale usage, was UPI, right? The payment system. And again, in some sense, it's more of a DPI. There's a central switch. It's run by NPCI. And while in Aadhaar, the access was slightly wider, here it is much more controlled by the Reserve Bank, and only certain licensed entities can access the UPI switch. And some of them contractually have allowed partners to come in as well, which then has opened the door a little more. But broadly, the number of companies that are accessing UPI to provide services to everybody is much smaller than the number of people who are using Aadhaar. But Aadhaar comes under a governance which actually derives from a bill passed in Parliament, and as a result, it's much harder to change. It's much slower to change. And rightly so, I'm not disputing that. I'm just sort of comparing and contrasting. While UPI comes under the RBI and NPCI, and again, it's slower to change than I know what a Microsoft or a Google would do, but or a young startup would do. But on the other hand, it can change faster than Aadhaar, and we have seen that happen. Over the years, there's been a progress in terms of features and availability, much more so than with the UIDI, right? But again, in terms of implementation, this turns out again to a very centralized architecture, if you will. But now, the most recent set of goods that have come out of this table is ONDC, the Open Network for Digital Commerce. And ONDC is interesting because if you take a look at how it is set up, there's certainly an organization called ONDC which runs the network. But then underneath that is a protocol which is from outside. It comes from Beacon. I think they just renamed themselves to FIDE, which, but anyway. The point being that it's a protocol, and it's an open source protocol which anybody can use. But to participate in the network, you need to register with ONDC, and ONDC is much more, the conditions they're imposing on the network are very minimal. And as a result, we are now moving away from, in terms of architecturally, we are going away from centralized systems to also looking at protocols which are community-driven, community-developed, and open source. And so that itself is an evolution that we have seen in this country over the last 10 years. And a lot of this has come about because of building these systems, then thinking about them, working with civil society, with other partners, and even global folks who are looking at what's happening in India and trying to think about how it could adapt to the rest of the world. And so the lessons, et cetera, are being better understood, and it's helping us as well. And I think we are going down this journey, which is very interesting and is going to continue. But coming back to impact, right? I mean, we are here to talk about tech and impact. And so, when we think about that, where does this fit in? And I want to go back and again sort of revisit these three systems in a way that I think will help us think through that. And we had identified back, in the late 2000s, that ID was a big problem. Post FATF, at some point, there was this massive increase in KYC requirements, which then made it difficult for people to get bank accounts. And we saw that in the journey of the country, where we had very few bank accounts in the first decade of the century. But then post-Aadhaar, we were then able to increase that number. That required, of course, tech, but also required political will. It requires the regulator to be part of it, and so on. It's a fairly complex orchestration that was required to get that to happen. But ID was a key tech component of that. So tech alone didn't do it, but it was a significant component which then allowed it to happen. And then also the fact that all of this tech was built as a layer on which private sector, government, and other entities could innovate, an ecosystem around it, I think was another factor which then allowed for that to happen. And so again, within the tech space, I would think of DPGs and DPIs in exactly that manner. Is to say this sort of provides this central layer which goes far and wide and allows other people to build on, innovate, and solve the specific problems that they are wanting to solve. So while Aadhaar solves the ID problem and does it well, Somebody else may solve a direct benefit transfer problem. Somebody may use it for housing. Somebody will use it for airport entry. Somebody will use it for a gig workforce, so on, right? There are many places where this would get used. And that is what makes it a good rail. We have the same thing with UPI, again, is that where we thought in terms of how we could solve and make a simple payment system, but then we also made it in a way where you could program it in, you go to a website, it shows you a QR code, you scan it, and boom, your transaction is done. There are many other aspects in the protocol which didn't take off, but what did take off was basic payments. But now you're seeing the next set of things around where you can set up recurring payments and so on. All of this comes because the protocol makes it easy to do. But in terms of usage, over time, it's happening slowly. So that's the second piece, is this whole ecosystem piece. And it's the ecosystem which actually solves the problems that you're looking at. Not Aadhaar, not UPI, but what it does is make it possible. The second part around inclusivity comes from the fact that while building it, we thought through what it would take to get to everyone. So with Aadhaar, we made it as easy as possible for people to enroll with minimal requirements. And even if you didn't have that, there was a way to override it through what we call the introducers. Not very widely used, but still it was there. So that was one aspect of it. It is almost positioned as a right to an ID, though that's not the way the bill is worded. But the essential, if I were to rewrite that and think about it today, I would sort of make it a right to an ID, where you say, as a citizen or as a resident of the country, I have the right to have the government issue an ID that allows me to lead my life in a way I want to. While that's not the wording of the bill, that is sort of what I think flows through the bill and the implementation. And in some sense, that's, I think, a better way to frame it, but we've not done that. So inclusion, payments. With payments, we did multiple things. So UPI was one of them. And today, UPI serves the smartphone market very well, which is really not the bottom of the pyramid, but it's a fairly large number. But you can receive payments even if you don't have a smartphone, right? You see many places that have a QR code with this little sound box, and when you make a payment, the person is notified through audio that the money has been received. They don't need a smartphone. They just need that QR code and an ability to get an alert. But on the other hand, if they want to make payments, how do we enable that? So the second thing that we had done at the launch of UPI was we enabled it on USSD. So if you have a feature phone, then you can still make the payment through UPI, but that didn't take off, right? I mean, many people in the room are probably not even aware that we had done that. So we continue to work on that. I think a couple of years back, interrupted by COVID, we had launched a grand challenge to enable payments through feature phones. We worked with the Gates Foundation and NPCI. We set up an award. 3 companies were selected. They worked with NPCI. And sometime earlier this year, RBI launched something called 123 Pay. And 123 Pay is actually this collection of technologies which will allow a feature phone to initiate a payment over UPI. Early days, only one of them has actually rolled out. The others are still in that process of going live. And we'll see how it plays out. But I think we continue to work towards it. That was the point that we make, that it was in our mind, it was been there, and not just in our mind, it's been in our work streams to make it happen. And we continue to do that. And the third category is, of course, people without phones or people who are unable to use tech. And there was an Aadhaar-enabled payment system, a Aadhaar payment bridge, but that was not really designed for merchant payments. And so there's something called Aadhaar Pay, which was launched, which allows a merchant to accept payments through Aadhaar. Again, it hasn't taken off. So it's very difficult to solve for this, but there have been attempts to sort of get everybody onto the table, make sure that when we think in terms of these use cases, we include everybody. And then, sometimes some things will take off, some will not. And what doesn't, you iterate on and improve. And that's with that attitude, I think we will get to our goals. That's sort of our goal. And so we'll move on that. Now, another point which I noted down was around having use cases in mind. So while we said we identified ID as a problem, we also thought in terms of what use cases we would build early on, which would then allow for it to take off. So just like a startup, you have tech, but then you convert it into a product. You also add a go-to-market strategy to it. We went through all of that. And for Aadhaar, it was the financial system. That would be the first use case that we thought, other than the subsidy payments. And so that's what led to the direct benefit transfer coming through early on, because that then allowed for usage of Aadhaar in a way that was beneficial to both people receiving the payments as well as for people sending the payments. And so that then allowed us to go out, get benefits quickly to people. We saw the benefit of that during COVID, where there was a time when the government in the first lockdown decided they had to give some kind of a subsidy to a lot of people. It took them 2 weeks to actually create a list. What they did was they looked at various schemes and eligibility criteria and said, we are going to do a union of these schemes and make them eligible for this payment. It took them 2 weeks to decide on how to do that. Once that list of unique Aadhaar numbers was created, one morning all the money went out. Right? I mean, compared to that, the US was sending checks, took 6 to 8 months. More recently, Germany was talking about how to take them 2 years to send out subsidy for energy bills, and because they didn't have this infrastructure in place. And there's a kind of resilience that, because for us for them it's a once in a blue moon kind of a thing. For us, we do a lot of subsidy payments. It's an important use case, we built it, and that has served us well, given us a lot more resiliency during this crisis that we had. So I would sort of look at, and all of this I think comes from the fact that we made it easy to use. I mean, that's what the API, the ecosystems, et cetera, all point to. And I would like to see, as things develop, we continue to build on these ideas. Now, the question was also around what are the issues and challenges, right, that we see as an ecosystem here. And I think what we've done, we've been successful at it, but there are challenges, right? I mean, in terms of like Aadhaar, we built it with the central government through a bill and all of that. It's very hard to change. But even to build it, it takes a lot of work to get everybody to agree to what is being built without adding more features, without diluting it, without increasing responsibility and hence reducing the responsibility of the ecosystem and so on. And then to be sure it will succeed, I think it took a lot of credibilities, or people's credibility was on the line, and we managed to do it. It took a lot of work to do that, and not very easy to do. I think that challenge has reduced over time, partly because of, say, this migration from being centralized to protocol kind of things. But at the same time, with reputation, it has gone up. I mean, there's a big, so what's happened is it's become easier for people to give you space to do it, but then they expect a lot more. They expect everything to be successful. And I think that's one of the challenges we will see going forward. The second is use cases evolve. And I think when you design things, you design with certain expectations, and some of those change. So again, going back to Aadhaar, we said we don't want to do face recognition. Technology is not good enough. We captured the faces, etc. Today, it's good enough. And you don't want to do it. So within the Aadhaar bill, there are actually provisions that would prevent you from doing it. The most important one is the only external service you provide is actually a 1:1 match, not a 1:n match. And that's part of the bill. But so, sometimes you have to be a little forward-looking to say things will change. How do you make sure that we don't create a surveillance state? And so, it actually goes back to that. But I don't know if you've thought through all these challenges, right? We've thought through some. We were able to provision for it. But have we done everything? I don't know. And in the future, will we? Again, I don't know. Inclusion, again, I highlighted how we think about it, but then, it doesn't always work, right? And you have to constantly keep on trying to think through what else it takes. And, given our size, even if you have a 0.1% exclusion, that's 1 million people, right? And so while we designed it in a way that we would include everybody, there are probably still things we could do better on that. But on the other hand, the question is, when you have exclusion to the tune of 20, 30%, are we okay saying that, okay, let's go out, roll out with 0.1%, and we'll still figure out a way to get past that? And I don't know that's the right answer, right? I mean, the public expectation is always 100%. And I don't think we can always meet it. And so this is going to be a question, and particularly when we do it through the government, right? When it's a private company doing it, that question is less frequently asked. But when it's something like the government doing it, that becomes a very important question. And again, so that I think is one of the challenges that, as I reflect on what we have done, I think that continues to be a challenge, and we have to keep meeting it. In terms of, I think, transitioning, so my journey started from there, and while I still do some of the work on that, particularly, I think I've stepped back from a lot of the policy conversations, and I've become an investor, but I do participate in one of the streams of work around it, which is to evangelize what we have done in India and abroad, and also work with MOSIP, which is an open source ID platform, which allows other countries to leverage what we have done in India and in other parts of the world on ID. Professor Rajgopalan is here. It's a project at IIIT Bangalore, and he heads it and runs it. I'm on the technology committee, and I support it through the kind of tech that we build. And so I do participate in that, but within the Indian ecosystem, I kind of put my VC hat on before I put any other hat on. And so I look at startups as the medium of change. So, while the role of government is to build these public platforms, we think that the change will only happen when somebody who's motivated goes down to make that change happen and finds a way to make it work with support. And so we've kind of worked over the years to create an ecosystem to give support to some of these ideas. So for the last 4 or 5 years, I've been at CII.co, which is the incubator arm at IIM Ahmedabad, and where we've set up 2 or 3 pools of capital, 2 of them on the impact side. One is called the Bharat Inclusion Initiative, where we support multiple streams of work. We start with evangelizing these public goods to various startups and communities around the country. We then also have an EIR program for people who want to come. We give them initial support, and they can experiment on certain ideas and work on them. Focus towards inclusion. We have given out some research grants to other institutions to do research in spaces which could be amenable to technology having impact. We think that research is an important component we don't do enough of in India. So an entrepreneur goes out into the field to do something based on an idea they have, and there's very little supporting research or landscaping, et cetera, that's done. And we think there is room for that to happen. And also, I think the research culture in the country needs to improve and grow. And so we got some philanthropic capital to give out as grants to make that happen. And so we have been doing that. In addition to that, we run a lab where we take an accelerator cohort for 8 to 10 companies. We've done 6 of these and 42 companies. I noticed one of the companies is in common with the work that SCAI is supporting Navana Tech. And we've been supporting startups for financial inclusion. And so this is all philanthropy supported work. So we get philanthropic capital, which we deploy through this effort. In addition to this, I run a VC fund, as I mentioned. So I actually run a fund on inclusion through tech called the Bharat Inclusion Seed Fund, where we support companies who are using tech to expand markets, to bring access to more people. We have about 7 or 8 companies in that portfolio right now. Excuse me. Yeah, so that's one of the things we do. Then I run something called the Bharat Innovation Fund, which is actually focused not on inclusion, but on innovation, where our thought is that we need companies that are not just execution focused, but build IP, have innovation which is defendable. And so we think that will actually create a lot of value. And the Indian startup ecosystem is starting to grow in that direction, and we thought we should be at that edge supporting companies doing that. And so that's in the pool of capital that we have for investments. So that plus, I think, MOSIP is where a lot of my time is spent, and that I think pushes along many of these ideas that we are going to be talking about today. So I'm very excited to see what MSR is doing, to be here and to join this conversation. So I'll take questions now.
Thank you. Yeah, we are running a bit over time, but so maybe we'll take Bill's question, and then we also have a session post the tea coffee break, which is like an open session, for discussion. So we will take Bill's question, and Arshay, you want to?
Hi, Sanjay. Great talk. Bill Teese from Everwell and Microsoft before that. So I think one thing that's just staggering when we look at platforms like UPI is just how they permeated all the sectors and all the companies. I mean, everything from startups to big corporates, low-income users to high-income users, across sectors and geographies. And now when we look at emerging platforms like Health ID and ABDM, which are now available, but most people don't use them or know about them, and we're one company that supports them and is trying to evangelize them. What can we learn from how UPI succeeded? What was done maybe behind the scenes? What were the incentives? What were the conversations that drove that uptake? And how do we take the best of those ideas and help things like Health ID or future platforms to also succeed and not end up like the unused parts of UPI, but actually take over the world? Yeah.
So actually, one thing I had in my notes which I didn't talk about was really about how long it takes for change to happen. Aadhaar, for the first 5 to 6 years, was about issuing IDs, and usage came later because it took a long time for the coverage to happen. But we had enabled usage very early on, but it took time to take off. UPI also, in my view, took about 3-4 years for it to actually become strong. Even though people talk of demonetization, start to become aware of it, the fact is that if you take a look at the curve, it's still an exponential growth. And so we got to a reasonable point only about 3 years from the launch. It's been 6 years now from the launch. So I would say these things take time. The important things are actually to, and a startup would have died, right, if a startup had done this. So, because getting somebody to support you for 3 years without the numbers supporting it is really hard to do. So it's a tough one. It takes time to make these changes, but I think if you stay focused on the graphs, on the numbers, if you see them growing exponentially, even from a low base, you're on the right track. I've seen this with all of these layers, by the way, is that you start from a low base, it keeps growing, the shape of the curve is right at all scales. Right? And so I think you'll see the same with the Health ID and so on. Though the government push on Ayushman Bharat should help it move faster, right? And I think the pandemic and COVID helped that as well. But I think there's still, people don't realize that the underlying infrastructure is what is shared on the health stack and how it will happen. So I would say patience is one thing, and just watch those numbers and see if it's going the right direction, and where the bottlenecks are, find those and support it. That's what we did with UPI, by the way. The first 6 months of UPI was to bring down error rates. As simple as that. I mean, that's what we focused on, to say, how can we improve onboarding success rates, how can we improve transaction rates, and so on. And then recently, NPC has started publishing the failure rates. They are now at a reasonable number. The first year they were not, right? It's only when those error rates came down that it took off. And that's something which, every system has to watch out for. Basic engineering, right? You launch it, you iterate, you fix, you find, you measure, you continue to do that. And I think all our systems do that, but do plug into the data and see what is being seen. And I would say that's where the focus has to be. But as a startup that's riding on it, you may have less control. And but I would say these things take a little bit of time, but patience helps.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sanjay. We'll probably hold more questions for later. I'm sure Sanjay is also around. And yeah, thank you so much, Sanjay. That was such an inspiring talk, and we look forward to many more such revolutions coming from your energy. Yeah, thank you.